Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat malam semuanya. Selamat datang di acara Chrome Dev Summit Extended 2020 oleh GDG Jakarta. Perkenalkan, nama aku Casey. Aku yang akan menjadi moderator di acara kita hari ini. Nah, sebelum kita mulai, aku mau jelasin dulu nih acara kita hari ini itu apa sih. Jadi, Chrome Dev Summit Extended 2020 ini merupakan ekstensi dari acara Chrome Dev Summit 2020 yang merupakan konferensi tahunan untuk para developers mempelajari tools dan pembaruan terbaru dari Google Chrome. Nah, sebelum kita mulai, aku mau bacain dulu nih rules untuk teman-teman yang ikut nonton di rumah supaya acara kita berjalan dengan lancar. Rules-nya itu, yang pertama, ada teman-teman diharapkan untuk bersikap baik, respect satu sama lain, dan interaktif pada saat live berlangsung. Kemudian yang kedua, pelecehan dalam bentuk apapun tidak ditoleransi dalam acara ini. Dan jika tidak mematuhi peraturan ini, akan diblokir agar tidak dapat berinteraksi di obrolan. Kemudian yang ketiga, diharapkan untuk tidak memposting apapun yang berhubungan dengan iklan dan promosi. Dan yang keempat, jangan memposting konten apapun yang berhubungan dengan negatif seperti kasar, sara, dan agama. Nah, setelah itu aku mau bacain dulu nih agenda kita untuk hari ini. Jadi nanti kita bakal ada 4 sesi. Yang pertama itu, kita bakal bahas tentang Progressive Web Apps and Workbox.js. Dan yang kedua, kita bakal bahas tentang Tools to Improve Web Performance. Kemudian yang di sesi ketiga, kita akan bahas tentang The Wonderful World of New Web APIs. Dan di sesi keempat, kita bakal bahas tentang Sign Up Form Best Practices. Terus di akhir, kita bakal ada kuis untuk yang berhadiah dengan total $50 OVO untuk 10 orang pemenang. Nah, teman-teman makanya kalau mau ikut kuisnya di akhir, jangan lupa stay tune sampai akhir ya. Oke, tanpa menunggu waktu lebih lama lagi, kita mulai aja ya sesi yang pertama. Yaitu kita bakal bahas tentang Progressive Web Apps and Workbox.js oleh Thomas Puras, Developer Evangelist at Cloudinary. Please welcome Thomas. Oke, tanpa menunggu waktu lebih lama.
My name is Tamas, and I work as developer evangelist at a company called Cloudinary, and I also happen to be a Google developer expert in web technologies. And it's a pleasure to be here and doing this presentation to you today. Now, as part of this presentation, we're going to be talking about progressive web applications, and we're going to take a look at what progressive web applications are, how they work, and how you can use them today to achieve some really cool and interesting things on the web. So what is a progressive web app, or PWA for short? Very simply put, it's nothing more than just a website that has app-like features. Now, if you think about it, what kind of features applications have that websites, traditionally speaking, do not have? And those are the fact that an application is actually installable. So you can install it on your phone or on your laptop. It's also available offline. So some basic features and functionality of an application is always available for you. And it's re-engageable, meaning that these applications can send you notifications so you can interact with them and go back to the application. So a progressive web app tries to adhere to these 3 principles, and it tries to create web applications that work offline, that can be installed, and that have notifications, amongst other things. Now, I like to refer to as progressive web applications as a hybrid application type, because it's going to work on both a mobile phone as well as on a desktop computer. And moreover, it is going to feel and act as a native application, which also means that you don't need to write and create an application using Swift or Kotlin, so you can just use one single code base for all purposes. So you don't need to create an iOS app, an Android app, and a website. You can just create one single app that will work in the same way on all of these devices. Now, there are, of course, additional benefits that you can take into consideration when you work with progressive web applications, which I'm going to mention soon. So how does that work? How does a progressive web app work? How can you enable a progressive web app to have these features? Now, there are certain APIs in browsers that enable this functionality for you. So for example, there is the service worker and the service worker APIs. There's also the cache interface and the cache API. There's some push and notification APIs, and there are a lot of additional web APIs that help you to create very compelling progressive web applications. Now we're going to take a look at the service worker because that is one of the fundamental components that allow you to create a progressive web app. Again, simplifying things, what is a service worker? You can think of a service worker as a proxy that is capable of intercepting the standard request and response cycle of the browser. Okay, so what does that mean? What that means is that you have, for example, a site called example.com and you're requesting the index.html page. So you type that in and your browser behind the scenes will execute an HTTP GET request. With the service worker, you can actually capture that request, do something with it, and then send the updated request to the internet. Now, the internet, or wherever this particular site lives, the server, is going to send the response back. And when it sends the response back, the service worker can again sort of stop the incoming request, massage it, manipulate it, modify it in any way that you want it, and then the response is going to be sent back to the browser. Now, even though in this particular image on the slide, you see that the service worker is sort of in the middle, but do know that the service worker is part of your browser, right? It's not separate. It's just easier to demonstrate it on the slide this way. Then we also have the cache interface. So the cache interface basically stores some data inside the cache itself. So you can put HTML pages or HTML code and JavaScript and CSS and fonts and images and other stuff into this cache. And what's great is that the service worker API can work very well with the cache API and the cache interface. So that means that maybe you send out a response, and as part of the request that comes back, you take, for example, the HTML and you save that into this cache. And this is exactly what enables you to have offline capabilities. Because if you think about it, all the assets that you need to display your web application are now part of the cache, which means that if you don't have access to the internet, you can still serve those assets from the cache. And this is really how offline capabilities added to a progressive web application. And if we look at things from the code perspective, it's really, really simple. So in this code sample, what we're doing is actually registering a service worker called serviceworker.js. So you can see that the service worker is nothing more than just a JavaScript file. And then if we open serviceworker.js, what we can do is specify the files that we want to cache. So for example, index.html, app.js, and app.css. Then we create a cache name and we say when this service worker is being installed by the browser, we want to open and create that cache with the name of, whatever name we specified. In this case, it's my-cache. And then we're just going to add all these files. So all the files that we have specified are going to be added to the cache. Then inside the service worker, we can also add an event listener for the fetch event. The fetch event is the event that the browser emits when it's going to request a page. It's going to fetch a page. And what we do here in this particular piece of code is that if we do have a match for the file requested inside the cache, we are actually returning it from the cache. If it's not that, then we are attempting to fetch the request from the network. And this is going to enable us offline functionality. All the assets are in the cache. We shut down the network. Then we can serve up the files from the cache. Otherwise, we go to the network and serve it up from there. So this means that you should no longer receive this no internet connection symbol, because there's always going to be something that your progressive web app should be presenting to your users. However, the service worker API is very complex, and there are lots of edge cases, like how do you update content? Do you cache first? Do you go to the network first? And these are relatively tricky to understand and work with, because the more stuff you need to work with, the larger your app, the more complicated it is going to be. So the thing is, you're in a lucky place, because there is this open source JavaScript library created by Google, which is called workbox.js. So Workbox.js is really just a wrapper on top of the service worker and the cache interface and many other APIs, and they give you very easy functions and methods to achieve very complex tasks. And this allows you as a developer to create very compelling progressive web applications without being lost in the rabbit hole of figuring out how the service APIs and how the cache API actually works. So here's an example, and believe it or not, even though it looks a little bit more complex than the previous examples, what you see here is a very simple Workbox.js service worker file, which basically caches every single asset that you have. So all the HTML, all the CSS, all the JavaScript automatically, plus it is also going out to a REST API and it's going to cache the response from that REST API. So even dynamic content can be cached using Workbox. Furthermore, you can also cache images. So here's a particular example where if the request that goes out via the service worker is an actual image, then you can create a new cache just for those images, and you can specify additional plugins for your images. So in this case, we are saying that only 60 images should be stored in the cache, and we also calculate that the age of these images should be 30 days. And this gives you a nice rotation for your images inside the cache, right? So if you need the 30 days or you have the 61st image to come in, the old one is going to be deleted by Workbox. And all of this is done pretty much automatically for you. Now let's talk about progressive bits in the progressive web applications, right? So there's a reason why they are called the progressive web app. And the reason why they're called the progressive web app is because it's assumed that you're going to give progressive enhancements to your users based on certain conditions. So for example, what happens if your application is offline? Well, you still want to show something for your users. Now, what if your user is on a very slow connection? Well, you probably don't want to stream an HD video for them, but you still want to give them some visual elements, but make sure that those are optimized. If the user is on a full-blown, 100 megabyte Wi-Fi connection, then yes, you can give them all the features that you have. But basically, try to figure out a way that you give nearly the same experience to all of your users. And the progressive web app can help you with that. And in fact, I have an example here where, I'm saying that the web is visual. And there's this anecdote that I like to say, a couple of years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, people, or maybe 20 years ago even, people used to say that they have a cat. And they would just tell you, yeah, I have a cat. Now, maybe 15 to 10 years ago, people started to take pictures of the cat and upload it to various places. So you would see all these cat images on the internet. But people these days, they're actually posting videos about the cat, right? So in the same way, the web is becoming ever so visual. Now, there are lots of images out there and lots of image formats that you need to be aware of. And managing all of these is really not fun. And also you need to remember that some users may be using a 3G connection and they would need to access more optimized images than the person who's on a Wi-Fi connection, maybe on their desktop. Now, progressive applications can actually help you with this. And what I'm proposing to you here is, I'm using a sort of new web API called the Network Information API that is available in modern browsers. Not all of them support it, but still the idea I'm hoping will catch up and is going to be a really exciting thing to see in action in the future, hopefully. So essentially, I'm using a cloud-based image management and optimization transformation solution here called Cloudinary. So we are assuming that all my images and all my media assets are uploaded to this service. Now, the reason why Cloudinary is great is because you can upload, images and videos to their cloud-based service, and they give you a URL, and you can serve those images. Furthermore, you can actually manipulate how these images are served. In other words, you can basically optimize and transform your images. So here's an example, and Cloudinary has this Q_auto sort of modifier that you can add to any image URL. And what that does, it essentially says, hey, take a look at this image. If there's the QAuto flag enabled for that image, reduce the quality of that image in a way that is not affecting the human eye. So it's removing a lot of pixels and a lot of noise that you don't need to still have a great visual experience. Furthermore, they have additional flags that enable you to fine-tune how much this quality reduction is happening. So for example, QAuto low will return a very small image, and QAuto best is going to create a slightly better version of the image. Now, believe it or not, what you see here on the slide is an image of this lady, and the original image, so the woman.jpg image, is 570 kilobytes in size. Adding, and without changing the dimension, just adding QAuto best is going to render an image that is 9.9 kilobytes. QAuto low is going to generate an image which is 6.8 kilobytes in size. Now, put this together with the Network Information API, and you can truly give a very progressive sort of experience to your users. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a demo of this real quick. So I'm switching over to my browser, and I'm going to launch this application on my computer. So this is running on localhost, and this is a progressive application that I've created. And I call this, a typical news website that you would essentially use, right? So it's loaded, I load it again, still loads, everything's fine. Now I'm going to open the Chrome DevTools here. I'm going to switch to the Network tab, and I'm going to say that I am now offline. And immediately that I go offline, notice that I'm getting a sort of visual indicator here that I am offline. So none of these articles are available, but if I refresh the page still works, right? I still get some content, even though I'm offline. So that means that I'm basically serving all these assets from the cache. Now, here's an interesting scenario for you. So let's say that, you're sitting on your train and you're commuting. In an ideal world, without the pandemic, of course, you're commuting to work and you know that there's a very long tunnel coming up ahead. And you say, oh, you know what? I want to sort of read while I don't have a network connection in the tunnel. So you say, well, I want to read this article later, and I want to read this article later as well. So I clicked on the read later buttons. So what happens now? You enter the tunnel, and now you're going to go offline. But notice that the articles that you selected are not sort of blurred out. They're not grayed out. They are available. Remember, I am offline, but what happens if I click read more? I can just go ahead and read this article. The whole application just works even though I'm offline, and it gives me a visual indication, a visual cue as to what I can read. Why? Because read later saved the entire content of that page to the cache. The last thing that I would like to show you is the following. So I'm going to use the application tab in the Chrome DevTools panel, and I'm going to extend cache storage. And notice that I have an API cache, and in fact, this is the place where I actually store the response from the API, right? So here's the response. I can take a look at the preview here, and this is the response that makes up the article itself, right? So this is now in the cache. Also, all the files that I'm using are inside the cache. So all the HTML files are cached. And last but not least, Cloud-Inner images. So all these images that you see are also part of the cache. And this is what allows me to essentially serve up the image even though when I'm offline, or even when I'm offline rather. So what I can do, and this is going to be a very interesting thing to show you, I am going to go and enable fast 3G connection. Okay, so fast 3G connection is slower than my regular connection, and I'm going to go back to the application tab here real quick, and I want you to notice the size of the image, right? So this is, let's just remember the first one, 69 kilobytes, okay, which is this baseball.jpg image. So remember, I am now on a 3G connection, so I'm going to pretend that I'm loading this site using a 3G connection. And notice that the image size in my cache has been reduced to 51 kilobytes. Okay, that's interesting. So what happens if I now go with slow 3G connection and I refresh the page? Now the load time is going to be worse, and notice now I'm using 50 kilobytes, and all the other image sizes have also gone down. And this is the stuff that I was talking to you about before. Based on the network connection, I am actually serving different image formats, so different image sizes. Now, if I go back to the application, I'm now offline, so I'm using my full-blown Wi-Fi. If I refresh this, then of course I'm going to be still serving the 69 kilobyte file because my application realizes that I have a very good network connection. Now, just if you're interested, I am going to open up the file of the service worker where I have this work. And let me zoom in on this because I think this is a tad too small. So let's do that. And bear with me for 1 second. Okay, so here's the service worker. And basically, it's this part of the code that enables this functionality. So I say, I want to sort of stop the request. If the request contains a JPEG, a PNG, or GIF, or a WebP, essentially if it's an image, I want to check for the effective type of the network connection API. And I say, if it's a 4G, I'm going to add QAutoGood to the URL in Cloudinary. If it's 3G, then sort of lower quality. If it's 2G and even lower quality, I'm going to default to the best. Then I'm going to reconstruct my Cloudinary URL, and then I'm going to just send that new URL as a new request. Essentially, I am stopping the browser from making a request for my image. I stop it, I then manipulate it, update it, and I resend a new request. So this is truly demonstrating to you what the service worker is capable of. Okay, so remember this. Progressive web apps are as much about creating offline and installable web applications as they are helping you to create progressive experiences and to help you to create a site or an application that has a very good performance. Also remember that a very basic use case for a progressive web app could be that you just store some of your HTML so that when people reload your site, you don't need to go out to the network and serve all your HTML. You can just serve it up from the cache locally on someone's machine, which is, of course, going to help you immensely with web performance. Okay, so here are a bunch of resources. So once you get the slides, you can click on these. These are related to the stuff that I mentioned. There's also lots of stuff that you can find on Google's website, on Web.dev talks, and even there are some very interesting talks about progressive web apps as part of the Chrome Dev Summit that happened last year. And with that, Terima kasih, I hope I pronounced that fine. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoy this talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Thomas, for your session. It was awesome.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really fine.
Can you hear me fine?
Yes, I'm fine.
But can you hear me fine as well?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I think we already have a few questions in the YouTube chat. Sure. So let's begin the Q&A session with the first question.
Okay, so that's at 6:19.
Yes. Okay, this is the first question from Surahutomo. It's about in progressive web apps, is there any limitation to cache a video with a big size? If so, is there any good practice technique to manage those caches?
Sure. So thank you for the question. I'm going to answer this in two parts. The first one is caching a video is different than how you would cache any of your other static assets, because essentially the way the browser handles videos is different than how it handles anything else. So there's this thing called the range requests and some other bits and pieces. So you need a different caching strategy for that. Now, luckily for you, this tool that I mentioned during the talk called Workbox, it essentially allows you to manage videos as well in a cache in a very easy way. But it's fundamentally different from how you would cache images and files. And the other question is, when it comes to the size of the cache, it's a very interesting question because depending on the browser vendor, as well as the browser version, as well as your operating system and your computer setup, the size of the cache is going to be almost always different, right? So there are many factors that you need to take into consideration when it comes to calculating the cache size, and the browser does this automatically for you. But then again, if you use one of these workbox methods to access the cache, you kind of don't need to know how large it is, because then the cache and the content is going to be automatically updated according to your code. Okay, so to simplify my answer, caching the video and big files is possible. Caching the video needs a different strategy, and then the cache size is going to be determined by a number of factors which you need to be aware of.
I see. Okay. I hope that answers the questions. Thank you so much. And let's move to the next question. Okay, the second question is from Sajid America. Is it possible to have multiple service workers?
That's a good question. So multiple service workers, assuming for a single page, you can't, but then you can scope them. So there is, I think the term is scoping. So you can scope your service workers, which means that for one site, you can basically specify that service worker 1 is for the root scope and service worker 2 is for /products or some other part of your site. So you can do that. You have to be very careful as well to managing these multiple service workers. And again, when you say multiple service workers, do you mean like multiple versions of the same? Versioning service workers is something that is very tricky. Again, Workbox does a really good job at sort of achieving versions. Yeah, I hope it helps.
Okay, thank you so much, Sajid, for the question. Let's move on to the next question. Is from Toyib Nurseha. Is this cache will be removed in some period?
Yes. Yes is the answer. So again, if you look back the presentation on one of the slides, I'm showing you a workbook example that has a plugin for the cache. I think it's on this slide where I'm talking about the images. And so you can set up a cache size, how many images you want to store in the cache, and for how long you want those images to be in the cache. So in that sense, you get control on how you want to remove it, what the time length for this is, and then there are again certain circumstances when the browser would clean this, but it's not going to do it. It's not going to do it when you shut down your computer. So in fact, it's a funny thing that when you start working with service workers, I often find that I develop something on localhost 8080. It's a progressive web app. I've done something with it, and then a year later, I use that port again. I open up my browser, I go to localhost 8080, and I'm like, I look at content that is completely irrelevant to what I'm doing now, and then I realize it's something that I did a year ago, and it's just showing me that content still from the cache.
I see. Okay. I think we have another question from Jeffrey Dewanga. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, if we add one signal, they also add their own service worker. Is that also using scoping mechanism?
So unfortunately, I don't know what one signal is. So I won't be able to answer that question, I'm afraid.
Okay. I'm really sorry, Jeffrey.
Sorry.
Okay. I think we done with the question in the YouTube chat. So before we move on to the next session, I think can we take a picture first?
Sure.
Okay, I will count to 3, and teman-teman yang di YouTube bisa. Oh, we got another question from Erwin Rahayu.
Okay.
Because we still have time for Q&A session, so okay. How to implement the progressive web apps with the web that has been running before? Is progressive web apps better than normal websites?
So I'm not going to make a statement whether a progressive web app is better than a normal website. What I will tell you is this. You know, a lot of companies have multiple products in a sense that they would have a website to promote their business, and then they create maybe an iOS app or an Android app, right? So in that case, you have your code base for the website, you have the code base for your iOS app, and you have the code base for your Android app, right? If you create a progressive web app, and unfortunately I didn't have time to show that to you, but the progressive web app can be installed on your mobile, and it would look like, you know, just as a native application. So in that sense, it's maybe better to have one single code base and manage that, right? So if people open it up in the Chrome web browser, it's going to be a website. If they open it on a phone, it's still going to be like a mobile website, but they can install that, and it's going to look and feel like any other native application. So that's one part. The second part of this is a progressive web app it has certain features that can help you to create websites that perform better. So just, you know, ignoring offline features and ignoring notifications and the fact that you can install them. If you just think about the fact that you can take what is often referred to as the shell of your application, so maybe the menu, the header, the footer, so something that is really static. You just take those bits and pieces from your app and you put it to your cache using this, various caching mechanism that I showed you. Loading up your site the second time will mean that those HTML files will be served up from the cache. So therefore, you're going to increase the web performance for your site for your users. So that's another way to think about, how it compares to a normal website. How does a PWA compare to a normal website?
Okay. I hope those answers will help. And before we move on to the next session, we will have a photo session. Is that okay?
Yeah, let me bring my...
Okay. So you have some props.
Because people love this, right? People love this. So I'm going to have the photo session with the unicorn.
Okay. Buat teman-teman yang ikut nonton di rumah bisa ikutan di YouTube komennya. I will count to 3 and we will take a picture.
Okay. Sure.
1, 2. Okay, one more. 1, 2. Okay. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you stay healthy and see you at the next event.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Oke, kita udah selesai untuk sesi yang kedua. Tadi kita udah bahas tentang progressive web apps, terus Workbox.js, open source library-nya JavaScript, terus API Catch juga. Menarik banget ya. Nah, sekarang kita mau lanjut ke sesi 2. Tapi sebelum aku jelasin sesi 2, aku mau ngingetin nih buat teman-teman, kalau misalnya nanti di akhir kita bakal ada kuis yang berhadiah, total hadiah $50 untuk 10 orang pemenang. Jadi teman-teman jangan sampai lupa untuk stay tune sampai akhir ya. Nah, kita lanjut ke sesi 2 ya. Jadi yang sesi kedua ini kita bakal bahas tentang Tools to Improve Web Performance oleh Kak Riza Fahmi, co-founder at Hacktive8. Untuk Kak Riza, dipersilahkan.
Halo. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Di sesi kali ini saya akan membahas tentang performa aplikasi web. Talk ini adalah rangkuman dari beberapa talk yang saya tonton di Chrome Dev Summit 2020 beberapa bulan yang lalu, dan saya rangkum menjadi satu topik utama, yaitu bagaimana meningkatkan performa aplikasi web. Sebelum itu, perkenalkan dulu buat yang belum kenal. Nama saya Riza. Saya adalah co-founder dari Hacktive8, sebuah coding bootcamp di Jakarta, dan sekarang coding bootcamp-nya sudah bertransformasi menjadi coding bootcamp online. Dan saya juga adalah Google Developer Expert untuk web platform. Oke. Kita akan membagi talk ini menjadi 2 bagian. Yang pertama adalah tentang alat bantu, yang kedua adalah tentang beberapa fitur-fitur web, termasuk juga web API baru yang bisa kita manfaatkan untuk membuat performa aplikasi web kita jadi lebih keren dan juga user experience yang lebih baik. Oke, kita bahas yang pertama dulu tentang tools atau alat bantu untuk mengukur performance web. Oke, yang pertama kita akan bahas tentang Lighthouse. Ya, Lighthouse ini bukanlah tools yang baru, tapi udah cukup lama. Namun di sini saya akan bahas beberapa hal yang baru dari Lighthouse. Mungkin buat teman-teman yang belum tahu, Lighthouse itu adalah sebuah tools atau alat bantu untuk menilai, ya, mengaudit atau menilai sebuah halaman web secara objektif. Jadi ketika teman-teman mengembangkan sebuah aplikasi, ada sebuah halaman gitu atau ada aplikasi secara keseluruhan bisa dites dengan menggunakan Lighthouse. Dan Lighthouse ini menariknya adalah dia bisa mengemulasi keadaan sebenarnya, hampir kayak real case gitu ya. Jadi misalkan koneksinya kurang bagus, terus diakses dari mobile app, mobile phone, diakses dari device yang mungkin ukuran layarnya lebih kecil dan lain sebagainya. Nah, di sini ada beberapa hal yang cukup menarik yang baru dari Lighthouse. Yang pertama adalah tentang interaktivitas sebuah aplikasi web atau halaman web. Namanya adalah time to interactive. Time to interactive ini adalah bagaimana kita, dia menghitung seberapa cepat aplikasi web sampai selesai loading atau selesai dimuat dan mampu menerima inputan dari pengguna. Jadi kalau misalnya ada aplikasi terus ada formnya udah bisa diisi, itu adalah menerima inputan dari pengguna. Dan kemudian ada yang yang menarik yang kedua adalah yang namanya cumulative layout shift atau stabilitas layout gitu ya, yang memastikan konten kita itu tidak isi dari konten kita kayak misalnya informasi berita dan lain sebagainya itu tidak berpindah-pindah tempat. Maksudnya apa? Saya kasih contoh aja. Misalkan ada sebuah aplikasi, ada header, kemudian ada kontennya, terus ada footer gitu ya. Nah, biasanya kalau aplikasi bentuknya seperti ini, CLS-nya atau cumulative layout shift-nya itu bagus sekali karena cukup tidak berpindah tempat. Dia ada header, di bawah header ada konten. Tapi kadangkala aplikasinya ada bannernya. Sebelum bannernya berhasil di loading, kontennya berada di atas. Kemudian begitu bannernya sudah selesai di loading, dia akan turun ke bawah. Gitu ya. Ini udah mulai kuning nih CLS-nya ya. Jadi harus berhati-hati. Ditambah lagi dengan adanya iklan, tiba-tiba muncul iklan di atas atau di bawah atau di tengah gitu ya. Nah, layoutnya turun lagi ke bawah gitu. Jadi kita sebagai user pun agak pusing kan dari melihat mata di atas terus belum selesai 1-2 kalimat kita harus turun lagi terus habis itu turun lagi gitu. 2-3 kali melakukan perubahan shifting dari layoutnya yang mengakibatkan tidak terlalu bagus. Nah, bukan tidak boleh ada banner atau tidak boleh ada iklan. Tentunya pemasukan dari iklan dong gitu kan, dari sponsor gitu kan. Nah, kita bisa mengakali dengan cara menggunakan placeholder seperti ini. Jadi baik itu banner maupun iklannya, kita tambahkan placeholder dengan tinggi yang fix. Jadi meskipun nantinya akan ada iklan dan juga ada banner, konten utama kita yang adalah berita contohnya gitu ya, itu tetap ada di bawah dan tidak bergeser, kira-kira seperti itu. Jadi CLS-nya akan selalu hijau. Oke. Kemudian kita juga berikutnya kita akan membahas tentang tools kedua yaitu Core Web Vitals ya. Core Web Vitals ini cukup baru yang adalah inisiatif dari Google yang menyediakan petunjuk ya, guidance bagaimana meningkatkan kepuasan pengguna atau user experience dalam menggunakan aplikasi web. Core Web Vitals ini memudahkan kita lebih fokus kepada hal-hal yang penting dalam meningkatkan performa dari sebuah aplikasi. Nah, Core Web Vitals ini juga beberapa itemnya dimasukkan ke dalam Lighthouse yang baru. Contohnya ada Total Blocking Time. Nah, Total Blocking Time ini dia bisa menghitung perbedaan waktu saat konten pertama kali terlihat atau first contentful pane hingga halaman bisa menerima inputan dari pengguna atau time to interactive. Jadi dia kayak menghitung perbedaannya aja. Kemudian di Lighthouse juga yang cukup menarik yang saya temukan ada sebuah section baru yang namanya Third Party Attribution. Di sini third party attribution ini dia menganalisa apakah halaman kita punya pustaka pihak ketiga atau library, third party library gitu ya, yang bisa membuat aplikasi atau halaman kita menjadi lebih lambat. Dan dampaknya seberapa besar, berapa kilobyte atau berapa megabyte yang bisa kita hemat ketika kita bisa menghindari penggunaan third party attribution ini. Contohnya, saya punya sebuah halaman gitu ya, halaman artikel gitu, yang ada title, kemudian ada isinya, teks, dan ada embed YouTube video gitu ya. Dan kalau kita embed YouTube video itu biasanya bentuknya formatnya adalah iframe ya. Dan ketika saya jalankan Lighthouse di halaman tersebut, maka muncul sebuah section third party attribution yang memberitahu bahwa YouTube embed video itu besarnya adalah 731 kilobyte. Yang mungkin buat sebagian besar dari kita itu tidak kecil ya ukurannya ya, cukup besar ya, hampir 1 mega ya, nyaris gitu kan. Dan menariknya lagi, Lighthouse ini tidak hanya memberitahu tapi juga memberi solusi. Salah satunya adalah di paling atas itu ada tulisan one package alternative available. Jadi solusinya adalah kita bisa menggunakan third party package. Third party package ini seperti lazy loading ya. Kalau di image itu biasanya dia ngeblur dulu, habis itu ketika kita udah berada di halaman tersebut, udah selesai loadnya, kemudian dia akan full image size gitu ya kira-kira. Nah ini juga bisa kita lakukan dengan package. Jadi katakanlah ini kan kayak 731 kilobyte, tapi user kita belum tentu mau ngeklik kan gitu. Nah third party package ini akan membuat sebuah thumbnail yang menyerupai embed YouTube ya. Yang di sebelah kanan itu adalah yang package, yang di sini itu mirip seperti embed YouTube, dan ketika diklik dia baru ngeload embedded YouTube yang sebenarnya yang 731 megabyte ya, kilobyte sorry. Dan dengan menggunakan package ini kita sudah bisa menghemat 2 mega. Itu besar sekali ya untuk ukuran kita, terutama di negara kita yang koneksi internetnya juga so-so gitu ya. Caranya juga tidak terlalu sulit. Kalau misalnya ini adalah contoh iframe embedded YouTube, kita bisa menggunakan third party library namanya Light YouTube Embed. Kita tambahkan link ke CSS dan ke JavaScript, dan kemudian kita bisa gunakan sebagai web komponen di sini. Info lebih lanjut teman-teman bisa cek di web.dev/thirdpartypackage. Oke. Kemudian tools berikutnya yang akan dibahas adalah tentang Chrome UX Report ya. Chrome UX Report ini adalah laporan dari user experience pengguna browser Chrome dalam mengakses aplikasi web di seluruh dunia. Dan berita barunya adalah sekarang Chrome UX Report ini ada total 8 juta domain atau origin, data yang terekam di dalam report ini, dan bisa diakses melalui 3 cara. Yang pertama dengan BigQuery di Google Cloud Platform, kemudian ada dashboard-nya juga, dan sekarang kita juga bisa mengakses melalui API. Jadi kalau katakanlah teman-teman ingin membuat sebuah aplikasi yang membaca laporan dari Chrome UX Report, itu juga sudah memungkinkan. Teman-teman yang tertarik bisa cek di web.dev/Chrome UX Report API. Dan ini adalah contoh penggunaan Chrome UX Report di BigQuery ya. Dia seperti SQL gitu sintaksnya. Dan di sini saya contohkan, saya melakukan query melihat perilaku user yang mengakses web saya rizafami.com di tanggal 1 Februari 2020, dan saya bisa cek beberapa hal-hal yang menarik seperti LCP atau CLS, dan masih banyak lagi option-option yang lain. Dan Chrome UX Report ini juga sempat saya gunakan ketika saya diminta untuk menjadi keynote speaker di DSD 2019. Di sana saya menggunakan Chrome UX Report untuk melihat seberapa banyak pengguna front-end framework seperti Svelte, jQuery, Angular, Vue, React, dan lain sebagainya, dan juga bagaimana performanya di dunia nyata yang sebenarnya diakses oleh user gitu ya. Teman-teman kalau tertarik, talknya sudah saya convert menjadi tulisan juga, ada di website saya, silakan dicek aja. Oke, kita lanjut lagi. Sebelum kita lanjut ke bagian kedua, kita lihat dulu apa yang sudah kita lihat di bagian pertama. Yang pertama adalah Lighthouse. Teman-teman bisa menggunakan Lighthouse sebagai alat bantu untuk mengaudit performa web yang teman-teman lagi develop. Kemudian ada beberapa metrik penting dari Core Web Vitals yang dapat meningkatkan performa web dan sudah ditambahkan di laporan Lighthouse juga. Dan teman-teman juga bisa menggunakan Chrome UX Report yang adalah sebuah laporan anonim yang didapat dari browser Chrome. Dan teman-teman bisa menggunakan Chrome UX Report untuk mengaudit performa web teman-teman, performa web klien, atau performa web siapa saja ya. mau kompetitor gitu ya, bisa aja. Karena ini datanya public, jadi semuanya bisa diakses di sana. Oke, sekarang kita ke bagian kedua. Bagian kedua adalah beberapa fitur dan web API baru yang bisa teman-teman gunakan untuk meningkatkan kualitas atau performa dari aplikasi web kita. Yang pertama ada sebuah properti baru CSS yang namanya Content Visibility. Nah, Content Visibility ini adalah kita bisa mengendalikan proses rendering dari browser sampai kontennya akan dilihat, terutama konten atau artikel atau halaman web yang ada scrollingnya agak panjang gitu ya. Dan biasanya kalau misalnya kontennya agak panjang itu si browser akan melakukan rendering dari header sampai footer sampai yang paling bawah kan. Tapi kan kalau buat beberapa user mungkin dia hanya melihat setengahnya aja, sedangkan setengahnya lagi mungkin dia akan rendering dan akan wasted kan, akan percuma gitu karena dia nggak akan lihat. Dan dengan content visibility kita bisa mengendalikan itu, jadi kita nggak perlu load semua, load sebagian aja. Ketika user udah hampir mencapai scrolling yang kita inginkan, baru dia load yang kedua, yang ketiga, dan seterusnya. Nah, content visibility ini sudah tersedia di Chrome versi 85 dan akan segera muncul juga di Firefox. Contohnya seperti ini. Kalau ada sebuah halaman dan ini mungkin kayak ada image, ada teks dan lain-lain, ini ada cukup panjang lagi ke bawah gitu ya. Kalau kita render semuanya, total kurang lebih ada 232 milisecond untuk proses renderingnya. Dan ketika kita tambahkan properti ini dengan content visibility auto, kita bisa menghemat kurang lebih 200 milisecond. Gitu. Karena tidak di-load semua. Apalagi ada image yang cukup berat dan cukup besar ukurannya. Jadi ini cukup meringankan. Kemudian ada fitur dari browser juga yang namanya Back Forward Cache atau BF Cache yang disingkat sebagai BF Cache. Nah, ini adalah optimisasi dari sisi browser gitu ya. Kita tidak perlu melakukan apa-apa, browser yang sudah melakukan ini untuk kita. Jadi apa yang dilakukan oleh BF Cache ini, dia akan menyimpan history atau halaman sebelum ini atau back atau forward itu ketika kita balik lagi itu halamannya tidak perlu di-reload, tidak perlu di-load ulang, nggak perlu dijalankan lagi script-scriptnya karena dia udah disimpan apa adanya, state terakhirnya udah disimpan gitu. Dan ini akan meningkatkan UX secara signifikan terutama untuk jaringan atau perangkat yang tidak terlalu cepat. Jadi ini cukup snappy, kalau kita back dia langsung nggak perlu loading lagi gitu ya. Dan yang menariknya adalah BF Cache ini sudah duluan tersedia di Firefox, Safari, bahkan di Internet Explorer. Sedangkan di Chrome akan segera, dan sekarang dia baru bisa diakses dengan menggunakan flag ya. Nanti kita akan bahas. Nah, contohnya gini ya, ketika kita berada di satu halaman, kemudian kita klik link yang lain, dia akan menuju ke halaman berikutnya kan. Contohnya di sini, dia akan menuju ke halaman GitHub saya gitu ya. Dan ketika saya pencet back, yang terjadi adalah dia akan load lagi dokumennya, HTML-nya, dia akan load lagi CSS-nya, dia akan load lagi tulisan-tulisannya, dan dia akan load lagi image-nya sampai dia muncul, dan juga JavaScript-nya. Oke, dan sekarang kita akan coba replay, tapi kita aktifasi dulu back forward cache-nya di Chrome Flags-nya. Ya, kita tinggal enable aja, dan kemudian kita coba lagi, jalankan, kemudian kita klik GitHub, kita masuk ke GitHub, yang dilakukan oleh browser adalah dia menyimpan atau membekukan halaman sebelumnya. Jadi ketika kita balik lagi, halamannya sudah tersedia tanpa harus dijalankan ulang, tanpa harus di-reload, dan lain sebagainya. Teman-teman yang tertarik bisa cek di web.dev juga, /bfcache. Oke, fitur yang berikutnya yang cukup menarik adalah iframe, iframe portal. Portal ini kurang lebih ya, kalau untuk sekilas terlihat mirip seperti iframe, tapi dengan dengan fitur-fitur yang lebih bagus dari iframe dan dengan navigasi yang lebih baik. Dan portal ini dapat mempermudah kita untuk mengembangkan aplikasi MPA atau multi-page application. Ini kebalikan dari SPA ya, single page application, sehingga kita bisa berinteraksi dengan mudah antar aplikasi web atau antar halaman gitu ya. Kalau pertanyaannya kenapa harus menggunakan MPA? Karena kan kalau kita develop aplikasi SPA kan tidak semudah yang kita bayangkan kan. Agak kompleks ya, makanya banyak framework front end yang bermunculan, tujuannya adalah untuk mempersimpel proses development di single page application. Tapi kalau misalkan teman-teman masih menggunakan multi-page application, teman-teman mungkin bisa memanfaatkan portal ini untuk membuat navigasinya jadi lebih menarik. Untuk lebih jelasnya kita lihat contoh aja. Misalkan di sini saya punya sebuah halaman dan di atasnya itu ada tombol donasi, kira-kira kayak gitu ya. Dan ketika saya klik, dia akan muncul seperti modal, dan kemudian usernya ngisi misalnya donasi 100.000, kemudian dia klik donate gitu ya, dan kemudian dia akan kembali ke halaman sebelumnya. Oke? Tapi sekarang kita akan ulangi lagi prosesnya, tapi kita lihat lebih detail apa yang terjadi di belakang layar. Secara sekilas mungkin terlihat simpel, apalagi kalau teman-teman yang udah biasa develop aplikasi SPA ya, ini gampang gitu, bikin modal, taruh ini, taruh itu, klik, selesai gitu kan. Tapi kalau misalkan kita lihat ya, tapi sebelum itu kita enable dulu ya portalnya ya. Portalnya karena masih under the flag, jadi si Chrome-nya kita enable dulu, enable portalsnya, dan enable cross origin portals. Kenapa? Karena kalau teman-teman ingin mengakses service yang lain di luar domain kita, di luar rizafahmi.com tadi, teman-teman harus enable cross origin juga, supaya nggak kena course ya. Nah, sekarang kita lihat lagi secara detail beserta dengan code-nya. Jadi yang saya lakukan adalah bukan hanya menambahkan button, tapi saya tambahkan sebuah elemen yang namanya portal. Ya, tag elemen biasa seperti HTML, kurung siku, portal gitu ya. Tapi saya bikin dengan JavaScript. Dokumen create elemen portal, kemudian portalnya, source-nya, saya masukkan sebuah service, namanya donasi ID. Ini imaginer ya, ini pura-puranya aja ya. Imaginer, ini mirip seperti iframe juga ya, ada src-nya. Dan kemudian saya append di dokumen.body ini, tapi saya hide, nggak kelihatan gitu ya, di belakang layar. Jadi dia load dulu. Ya. Oke, kemudian ketika sebelum diklik, ya tentunya kita kasih event listener dulu ya ke buttonnya, dan ketika button diklik, si portal yang tadi saya buat ke donasi.id itu akan diaktifasi. Jadi dia akan aktif sekarang. Yang terjadi adalah seperti ini. Saya masuk ke domain yang berbeda. Bukan rizafahmi.com lagi seperti ini, tapi masuk ke donasi.id. Tapi di donasi.id sekarang halamannya kosong awalnya. Kenapa? Karena saya interrupt ya. Saya kasih event listener portal aktif. Ketika portal diaktifasi, saya melakukan ini. Ya, saya ambil portal terdahulu yang adalah rizafahmi.com, ya, Adobe predecessor, kemudian saya append ke halaman donasi.id. Jadi yang terlihat adalah halaman web saya, padahal saya udah ada di web donasi.id gitu ya. Dan kemudian saya tambahkanlah filter blur sedikit ya supaya lebih menarik gitu, lebih eye catching gitu ya. Dan kemudian saya tambahkan UI-nya, donasi UI-nya. Dan kemudian user klik masih di donasi.id, dan kemudian begitu diklik, yang terjadi adalah si portal predecessor portal tadi yang ada rizafahmi.com akan teraktivasi dan dia akan kembali ke halaman web sebelumnya. Oke. Dan buat teman-teman yang tertarik dengan portal bisa cek di web.dev juga, hands-on portals. Teman-teman bisa cek banyak fitur-fitur lain yang belum saya jelaskan di sini. Ini baru sekilas aja. Jadi kalau kita mau katakanlah menggunakan payment gateway gitu, kan agak sulit ya kalau kita harus siapkan server, harus ada harus ada key, access key dan lain-lain gitu kan, ada secret dan lain-lain. Kalau ini kita bisa memanfaatkan service yang berbeda seperti karyakarsa.com atau Mitrans atau yang lain, kita bisa tambahkan di sana dengan menggunakan portal. Oke, jadi yang sudah kita lihat tadi beberapa fitur yang menarik. Yang pertama adalah content visibility yang bisa mengendalikan proses rendering halaman web, jadi lebih lebih bisa kita kontrol sesuai dengan user experience yang kita inginkan. Kemudian kita juga bisa mendapatkan pengalaman berselancar yang lebih smooth dengan adanya back forward case. Kita tunggu di Chrome berikutnya mungkin. Dan portal dapat kita gunakan untuk navigasi antar domain yang saling berhubungan. Dan portal ini juga sangat cocok digunakan untuk membangun arsitektur micro front end yang lagi ngetrend sekarang ya. Jadi biasanya teman-teman bisa pakai iframe, sekarang sudah ada alternatif menggunakan portal. Oke, sekian dari saya. Itu aja materinya. Lebih dan kurangnya saya mohon maaf. Semoga apa yang saya sampaikan bermanfaat. Buat teman-teman yang mau follow-follow, bisa follow saya di YouTube. Saya melakukan beberapa kali seminggu 2-3 kali live streaming. Jadi kalau teman-teman yang tertarik mau lihat saya ngoding, bisa ke youtube.com/rizafahmi, atau yang mau follow ke Twitter juga boleh, rizafahmi22. Oke, saya tutup dengan wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Oke, thank you banget Kak sesinya, menarik banget sih tadi tools-toolsnya dan sangat membantu untuk performance webnya ya, dan implementnya juga nggak susah ya Kak ya?
Iya.
Oke, nah kita langsung mau mulai ke Q&A aja ya Kak, karena di
Boleh.
YouTube ini udah ada beberapa pertanyaan nih Kak. Kita langsung mulai ke pertanyaan pertama. Dari Fadil, can you tell us how to simplify Angular Dart to get optimize the web result?
Okay, I cannot tell you because I don't know. Saya belum punya pengalaman dalam menggunakan Angular dan juga Dart, jadi saya belum bisa. Mohon maaf, saya belum bisa menjawab pertanyaan ini, gitu ya. Seperti itu.
Oke, kita move ke next question aja kalau gitu ya.
Oke.
Pertanyaan kedua ada dari Erwin Rahayu. Halo Mas Riza Fahmi, sehat selalu. Apakah Lighthouse bisa diimplement untuk web yang menggunakan framework seperti React?
Oke, halo Erwin, salam kenal juga. Kita udah kenal juga ya. Salam kenal lagi. Apakah Lighthouse bisa diimplement? Bisa. Lighthouse itu adalah tools, jadi tidak tergantung kepada framework apapun gitu. Lighthouse itu bentuknya ada dua. Yang pertama ada tiga. Yang pertama bisa diinstal sebagai extension dari Chrome, gitu ya. Bisa dicek di Chrome Web Store aja. Yang kedua bisa diinstal dengan npm dengan CLI tools gitu ya. Jalankan Lighthouse kemudian spasi nama webnya. Dan yang ketiga ada yang namanya Lighthouse CI, Continuous Integration. Itu juga bisa dimanfaatkan untuk ngecek apakah setiap komitan kita itu berpengaruh kepada performa atau enggak. Seperti itu.
Oke. Semoga menjawab Mas Erwin. Thank you. Kita next ke pertanyaan berikutnya.
Ya.
Ada dari Made Murti. Gimana caranya menggunakan Lighthouse di halaman web yang butuh login?
Ini juga pertanyaan menarik ya. Mungkin kita bisa bikin kan ini Lighthouse ini juga bisa digunakan pada saat kita develop ya. Jadi mungkin sebelum login gitu ya, itu bisa kita kita cek dulu atau bisa diinstal. Saya belum pernah nyoba sih ya, tapi mungkin bisa dicoba dengan menggunakan extension di Chrome aja. Jadi kita login manual, kemudian kita klik extension Chrome-nya untuk Lighthouse, itu mungkin bisa dicek di situ. Mungkin ya. Saya belum pernah nyoba juga soalnya gitu.
Oke. Banyak juga ya pertanyaan tentang Lighthouse. Oke, kita move ke next question ya.
Ya.
Pertanyaan ketiga ada dari Aris Tiaji. Konsistensi layout, apakah ada strategi untuk tetap mempertahankan struktur konten walaupun dalam keadaan sedang memuat halaman?
Ya. Tadi saya udah mencontohkan sedikit ya. Mungkin contohnya terlalu sederhana, tapi yang jelas yang saya contohkan adalah menggunakan placeholder. Jadi sangat disarankan, tim dari Google juga sangat menyarankan kalau katakanlah ada image atau ada iklan, ada banner dan lain-lain, itu sebisa mungkin ukuran paling tidak tingginya headnya itu sudah fix ya, sudah pasti gitu angkanya. Jangan sampai berbeda-beda di setiap halaman sehingga menyebabkan kontennya bisa naik turun gitu. Yang paling sederhana itu kalau katakanlah ada sebuah web, teman-teman diminta untuk develop sebuah web berita dan kemudian iklannya jalan-jalan, itu saya nggak tahu gimana solusinya ya. Jadi yang perlu dipersiapkan adalah gimana caranya supaya si konten itu tetap berada di tempatnya. Jadi jangan terlalu, kalaupun terpaksa harus agak sedikit turun atau sedikit naik gitu, jangan terlalu ekstrim gitu. Jadi agak sedikit gitu. Jadi mungkin dibikin placeholder masing-masing untuk add, banner, image dan lain-lain supaya tidak konsisten, dia tidak naik turun. Kira-kira seperti itu.
Oke. Thank you pertanyaannya. Kita next ke pertanyaan keempat. Ada dari Jeffrey Dewangga. Dari demonya Mas Riza, saya jadi kepikiran, sepertinya portal juga menimbulkan chance untuk phishing. Bagaimana menurut Mas Riza?
Halo Jeffrey. Iya, betul sekali. Memang masih banyak PR dari tim Chrome terutama yang sedang implementasi portal ini dalam hal privacy ya. Bukan hanya phishing, tapi banyak hal yang lain yang mereka sedang pikirkan. Makanya si portal ini belum tersedia gitu. Jadi masih di Chrome Dev Summit juga mereka berkali-kali ya salah satu fokusnya adalah privacy ini kan, makanya si portalnya masih ditahan dulu belum masuk ke production, kira-kira kayak gitu. Jadi kemungkinannya pasti ada, sama hampir sama seperti iframe juga, masih banyak security hole yang bisa dimanfaatkan. Karena itu makanya tim Chrome itu masih masih develop dan memikirkan worst case skenario-nya seperti apa.
Oke, thank you Mas Jeffrey pertanyaannya. Kita lanjut, masih ada pertanyaan kah? Pertanyaannya kayaknya udah habis deh. Masih ada? Oke, pertanyaannya udah selesai. Thank you buat teman-teman yang udah nanya. Makasih juga Mas Riza atas jawaban-jawabannya. Menarik banget sih materinya tadi. Dan sebelum kita lanjut ke sesi berikutnya, kita mau foto sesi dulu, boleh ya Mas?
Oh boleh, boleh.
Oke, kita foto bareng, aku hitung sampai 3 ya.
Ya.
Oke, 1, 2. Oke, sekali lagi boleh ya Mas ya?
Boleh.
Teman-teman di rumah juga boleh ikutan di YouTube komennya. 1, 2. Oke. Makasih banyak Mas Riza udah join kita hari ini.
Terima kasih juga kesempatannya sudah meramaikan diperbolehkan untuk meramaikan Chrome Dev Summit Extended juga.
Oke. Semoga kita ketemu lagi di event berikutnya ya Mas ya.
Siap. Terima kasih.
Bye.
Bye.
Oke, kita tadi udah bahas tentang tools-tools yang bisa membantu performance web teman-teman sebagai developers nih. Tadi udah ada tentang Chrome UX Report, portal, dan sebagainya. Menarik banget kan? Nah, sekarang kita mau lanjut ke sesi ketiga, yaitu tentang The Wonderful World of New Web APIs oleh Thomas Steiner selaku Senior Web Developer Advocate at Google. Please welcome Thomas.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me? Does this work? Yes, no? Let me just check in the chat. Yeah, perfect. Cool, perfect. I don't see a screen share button. Maybe you can just drive my slides from remote if this works. Yeah. All right, so let me start. Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Steiner. I'm a developer advocate working on the Chrome team based out of Hamburg in Germany. I would love to be in Indonesia physically, but yeah, luckily we can be here over the internet at least. So hello all the way from very far away where it's winter. So yeah, today I want to talk about the wonderful world of new web APIs. Can you switch to the next slide, please? Leave no one behind. So this is a message that you may have seen a couple of times in the last couple of weeks and months and almost years now. Leave no one behind is kind of the slogan that we see in hashtags that we see in buildings. This is a famous club in Hamburg where someone has sprayed "Leave no one behind" on the wall, and "Leave no one behind" is also something that I want to take as the slogan of this talk. Next slide, please. This is my title, so you can see Tomayak is my Twitter handle. If you're interested in asking any questions, this is the easiest way to reach me. Next, please. So why do I talk about Leave No One Behind, and why do I talk about this? Well, let me start very, very early on in the web. This is a slide from a slide deck from 2003. It's called Inclusive Web Design for the Future with Progressive Enhancement. It's been made by Stephen Champion and Nick Fink, and it was presented at South per Southwest in 2003, as I said. Next, please. The big question is, why do I talk about 2003 in 2021? The thing is, because in 2003 already, we had something that reflects on what we see today. So the rationale for progressive enhancement back then was it allows for the adoption of new tech and strategies without leaving any browser device behind. So you can see here, leave no one behind is very present already in 2003, and we still need it today. Next, please. This is an application that some of you may remember. It's Paint from Windows 95, but the fun thing is someone has built Paint on the web. You can see maybe the URL. It's I need to check myself, jspaint.app. So you can see that if you want to play with it in your browser. It's the good old Windows 95 Paint application just implemented in JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is the barcode if you want to scan it, so you can launch it more easily. Next, please. So this tool had a very fun paint mode where you have a spray can and you can spray on the canvas. I tried to recreate the graffiti that you have seen on the initial slide on the clock in front of Hamburg. Leave no one behind. I sprayed that using the spray can tool. It doesn't look great, so I tried something else. Next, please. I tried to use instead the text tool. So you can see it's a little clearer, more easily to read, but it's not looking great. Next, please. There's a little font selector that I can use to give it a more fun font, at least. And of course, one of my favorite fonts is Comic Sans MS. Woohoo! It's there, and you can use it. But like, if I look at the list of these fonts that this font picker exposes, it's not too many. Next, please. I was wondering, so I went into my computer's font book application. I'm on a Mac, so I opened the font book app, and you can see on my computer, I have 310 fonts installed. But these are way more than were exposed in the font viewer, so something clearly is wrong. Can we go to the next, please? One of these fonts on my computer is a font called Google Sans Regular. This is not a web font. You won't find it somewhere or anywhere on the web. This is a font that is exposed only on Google employees' laptops. So if you see someone that has the Google Sans font installed, you can be relatively sure that this person is a Google employee. Next, please. But why don't I see all these fonts in the font picker in the JS Paint tool? Well, the thing is, JS Paint only exposes the set of the so-called web-safe fonts. That's a well-known concept. So instead of having every single font on my computer, it only exposes those that are reasonably to be expected on people's computers. So it's the classic Arial, Times New Roman, and so on. The good news is we're working on an API to expose more fonts, like all the fonts that you have on your local computer. It's called the Local Font Access API. Next, please. If you look at the spec, at the specification, there's a link at the very beginning that points to the organization where this specification was published in. So you can see published by the web platform incubator. When I click through to this link and go to hello. Oh, here we go. I think I lost connection for a moment. Well, it's here from Germany, so looks like I'm back. Okay, so when I click through to a link from the specification, this is the landing page that I end up on. It's the Web Incubator Community Group landing page. Next slide, please. If I, from there on, click through to the Web Incubator Community Group charter link, I can see what the group is chartered to do. Charter is kind of a weird word from the W3C that means what a group is supposed to do. Can we go to the next slide, please? On this document, it says the Web Incubator Community Group provides a lightweight venue for proposing and discussing new web platform features. So there we go. This makes a lot of sense because the local font access API is, of course, something that is not exposed so far. So there needs to be somewhere a venue where some new features like this can be proposed. Next, please. If you continue reading, can we go one back, please? If you continue reading, you can see each proposal will be discussed in its own repository within the group's GitHub account. So this is important. Now we can go to the next slide. Because there's a lot of GitHub repositories that you can find in this list. Next, please. The one marked here in the lower left corner is the one for the local font access API. When we click through on that, and next, please, we end up on, I don't click through yet. First, let me read from the chart again, one more thing. As proposals gain support and become more stable and mature, they will be considered for migration to a W3C work group, where they can be put on the recommendation track. So this is kind of weird W3C language again. So what is recommendation track? It's kind of a strange thing that I didn't initially have an idea about. Can we go to the next, please? The W3C, being the W3C, has a lot of processes and a lot of documents. So of course, I have a document as well that documents the process that the W3C uses. Next, please. If you scroll down on this document, somewhere you will see this diagram. And this is finally getting me a closer idea to what it means to be in recommendation state. Next, please. Recommendations, one back. Yeah, here we go. Recommendation state is like the final step in all this process. So you can see here, it starts all the way on the left, goes through a couple of stages, and recommendation state is the final state. So this is when someone becomes officially an internet standard. In between, we have different various other states. For example, WD, working draft. We have CR for candidate review. We have CRD for candidate review draft, and so on. So there's a couple of stages in between. But think of the local font access API, we're not there yet. Next slide, please. If you think about these very, very early web proposals, like something that even is just an idea that isn't really fully finished yet, this is where it starts. It starts in the WICG, the Web Incubator Community Group that I've shown you in the very beginning. So this is before even something enters the standardization process from the W3C. So before even we start the working draft stage. So remember, recommendation all the way on the right, barely visible now, is the final state. WICG for the work that we do at Google and in other companies starts in the WICG. Next, please. In the WICG, there are a couple of companies. Some of them are Intel, Microsoft, and Google. The one that may look a little weird is maybe Intel, but the thing is, Intel has done some telemetry on their CPUs, and I found out that on more than 50% of all the CPU cycles that people spend on their computers, it's because of a running browser. So they want to make sure that whatever is running on their architectures is something that does run well on the architecture. So this is why they contribute to the Chromium project, which is the underlying open source project of the Chrome browser, of the Edge browser. And this is also, of course, why Microsoft and Google are in this group. Next, please. The three groups have formed and teamed up to something that is called Project Fugu. You can see here the little blowfish, that's kind of the logo of our group. And Project Fugu is also what I want to talk about today. Next slide. Project Fugu finally will make it possible to go from my list of all the locally installed fonts way to finally having a font picker that allows me to pick more than the web-safe fonts so that I can eventually pick all the fonts that are on my computer. Next slide, please. So the local font access API, now we know where it comes from, in what context it's being developed. Let me move on to the next slide. This is how you use it. First, you do feature detection. And this is, again, leave no one behind. We want to be sure that we only do this on browsers that support the local font access API. And remember, this is a very early API, so a lot of browsers will not support this yet. So here's basic feature detection if fonts in Navigator. Only then we continue. Next, please. Leave no one behind. Yeah, this is what I just said. It's very important to do this because if you don't do feature detection right, you will leave people behind. You will have a broken site that doesn't work for some people. Next, please. So this is a very powerful API. Remember what I told you in the beginning. If you know that someone has the Google Sans font installed on their system, you can be pretty sure that this person is working for Google. This is, of course, a private information. You may not want to share this with every single website on this planet. So in order to use this information that you have, among others, maybe Google Sans as a font installed on a computer, you have to first let the site in question do this. So this is why you use a permission. So here you can see the permission is local fonts. It's called local fonts. And you get access to it by asking for a Navigator permission request and then local fonts. Only if the state is then granted, you can then use the API. Everything else, you will throw an error. Next, please. This is how you use it. It starts with an, if you're getting access to the navigator.fonts.query, which will give you an iteratable that you can iterate upon. And you can see here it's asynchronous loop here. So you can see for await const metadata of fonts. And what you get access to is then the PostScript name, the full name, and the family. So like that, you can build your own font picker. There's also more information available because there's a lot of low-level information about ligatures, about just some lower-level features in the font. You can also get access to this by calling metadata.blob if you're interested in getting access to this information. Next, please. If you want to read more upon this, I've written an article that you can see on web.dev. Next, please. And this is the QR code if you're interested in the URL. So you can easily read this on your mobile phone. Next slide, please. And right now, this is a really early API. So if you want to test it, you can either just activate a local browser flag. So you can see here, it's called Font Access API. It's in Chrome flags for you to test. Next, please. But there's also an origin trial. So you can, if you tested this locally and you are sure that this is something that you need, you can also expose this to real users. So on your site, you put in a meta tag that has the origin trial token that you get from the origin trial sign up here. And like that, you can expose this to real users. Next slide, please. To sign up for this, this is the QR code. So you can sign up for your company, for your domain, and like that, allow list the local font feature for your audiences. Next slide, please. If you do this and you run a demo, like you can find in my article, this is the first thing that you will see once you click on the font picker. This is the permission prompt. Can we go to the next slide, please? Right now, this permission prompt reads, local font access glitch.me wants to use the fonts installed on your computer so you can create advanced typography. So this is the permission prompt that you would then allow or deny, depending on how trustworthy or not you deem the page. Next slide, please. And yeah, once you do that, you will see that the font picker starts to get populated. This is a demo that you can just access from the article. So I suggest just playing with it using your local system. But here's a couple of screenshots. Next slide, please. So you can see I can select all the random fonts that I have installed on my computer. For example, Wingdings as one of the examples. Next, please. And yeah, maybe sometimes when you work with these new APIs, you will spot issues. So you may, for example, spot something that looks weird or maybe unexpected behavior. If you go to the specification, there's always a link to a GitHub repository. Remember, everything we do on the WICG happens on GitHub in the open. So if you click through to the link, next slide, please, you will end up on the GitHub repo, where you can see a couple of open issues where you can just comment on, or where you can open a new issue with the problem that you may be having with this API. Maybe something is not working as you expect. Maybe some of the parameters are whatever unexpected. So you can suggest that the spec be modified, that the spec, I don't know, adds something else instead of whatever. So this is discussion that is happening in the open. Next, please. But spec issues are one thing. There's also an issue maybe with just the implementation, so that the spec says this should do X, but the implementation in Chromium does Y. If you open Chrome Status and search for the local font access API, and now we can go to the next slide, please, you will always find a tracking bug. So you can click through to this tracking bug. Next, please. Which brings you to Chrome Status, which is Chrome's official bug tracker. And you can see here on the left-hand side, all the engineers who work on the local font access API in the concrete case. You will see a lot of information about the spec, about the explainer, about the GitHub repository, and so on. So here you can say any kind of problems that you see with the implementations. So spec issues versus implementation issues, this is where you would file an implementation issue on the bug tracker. And if you are a company, you can, of course, also directly contact any of the engineers here. It's fully revealed, so you can see everyone who's working on this API. So you get direct access to the engineering teams if you know how to find them. Next, please. So the local font access API is one of many APIs that we work on in the context of Project Fugu. We have a big tracker. You can see the URL here, goo.gle/fugu-api-tracker, where you can see all the different proposals and all the different APIs that we already have shipped. So you can see here, that's the first section. Next slide, please. You can see all the proposals that are currently in origin trial. So something that you can play with already with real users. Next slide, please. You can see all the things that are currently in dev trial, so that you can play with it locally by setting a flag. And you can see here there's the local font access API highlighted. So now it's actually moved on to origin trial phase. So now it would be one stage further, but this screenshot is a little outdated. Next slide, please. And then ultimately, you can see all the APIs that we have on our backlog. So it's just things that we consider that we haven't gotten to, but very definitely there's interest in implementing this. Next slide. And then finally, there's a long list of things that we haven't really considered yet, but we're thinking we might at one point in the future look at this. And everyone can come up with new proposals. So you can just file a new feature bug for us and say, I would love to have an API that does X, Y, Z. And then we will put it on our backlog. We will see how important or not it is for other people, for other developers, for other companies. And like that, you can have an impact on the Chromium team's strategy here by just suggesting new APIs and use cases. Next, please. I don't have a lot of time to go into detail on all of these. So we have web.dev, our Chrome's documentation page, where you can see all the things that we work on in the context of Project Fugu. There's a landing page called Capabilities. Next slide, please. Here is the QR code that you can scan so that you can land there directly and read all the articles that you're interested in. Next slide. I just want to very quickly highlight a couple of examples here. One of them is the multi-screen window placement API that allows you to deal with different windows that you may have on your system and different screens. Next slide, please. The core idea here is we do have information about the windows, about the screens that are connected to your computer by going to window.screen. This is the output from my MacBook Air 13-inch. So you can see available height, available left, a couple of properties here. But actually, can we go to the next slide, please? My current screen setup looks like this. So you can see here I have the main computer, which is my MacBook. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a big iPad. And on the bottom, you can see a smaller iPad. And these iPads are connected with the Apple Sidecar feature. So actually, I can use them as real screens for my computer. So remember, this is COVID, working from home. So my setup is a little improvised, but it's working well. I can use it. So this is actually what you can see right now. Actually, I can just show you. It's not a lie. This is what I look like. Let me turn around, and you can see this is my screen right now. I'm using the iPad for projecting here. So that's the computer, and then there's a smaller iPad. So let me go back. Let me install the iPad again. This was kind of a small excursion into my local office here. So yeah, you can see this. But if you remember what the window.screen API said, it didn't have any idea about the connected iPads. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is a problem that the multi-screen window placement API fixes. Again, it's a powerful API because not everyone will have a screen setup like me, which means it's kind of a fingerprinting vector. If you know how my screens are arranged, I'm more identifiable than other people, which is why there's a permission prompt. So if a site wants to know what is my screen arrangement, it has to ask for permission. And then you have a new API called window.getScreens. Can we go to the next slide, please? You can see the output here, and now you can see there's more information because now you can see the built-in display on the left-hand side, and then also the iPad on the right-hand side. So you can see it has a different resolution, it has a different color depth, for example. So all in all, this gives me more information about why and how my screens are arranged. So this is a true advantage because like that, I can, if I have multiple windows that I want to arrange on the different screens, I can do that with this information in mind. Next slide, please. There's a small demo that you can play with. It's inspired by Elmer. I'm not sure if this is very popular in Indonesia, but it's an elephant that is squared. Can we go to the next slide, please? And if you run this demo, this is how it will look like. So it's meant to be a virtual trading desk. Of course, everything is fake data, fake cryptocurrencies. So you can see here, I'm looking at my portfolio of cryptocurrencies, and I'm very scared on this screenshot. But the core idea here is to show how all these windows can be very accurately arranged on the different screens. So you can see the 2 and 3 iPads actually, sorry, the 2 iPads, the 3 screens in total get completely used. So the API is aware of my screen arrangement, and also if I unplug some of the iPads dynamically, it will adapt directly. Next slide, please. Another API that I want to talk about is the keyboard lock API. This may be important for you when you are working on a virtual machine, which some of you may do. So you have your powerful desktop server somewhere in the office, but you're working from home. So you're connecting to a virtual machine, or you're connecting to a remote session that is running remotely in your office while you are at home, in your home office. And something important that you want to do in this case is you want to get the complete access to the keyboard and maybe transmit all keyboard events to the remote session and not have the keys be captured locally. Next slide, please. So the idea is you want to tell your remote desktop setup what kind of meta keys and what kind of keyboard combinations it should forward to the other machines. So you can say, for example, here, the meta left key and meta right key, so the control or command key on an Apple keyboard, and the tab key and the N key and the T key should all be captured. Like that, if you press these, the local machine, the local browser will not get the keyboard events, but they will be transmitted to the remote desktop session. So you can get a more realistic feeling of really working on this other computer that you're just streaming to your local instance. Next slide, please. There's a small demo that you can play with, also linked from the article. The core idea here is you enter full screen, and then if you press one of the combinations that have been captured, like in this concrete case, Command T or Command N, which are the keyboard shortcuts for creating a new tab or a new window on Mac, they would be then captured and blocked like that. You can use this locally in your remote session and pass this on to the remote computer. Next slide, please. Another very cool API is the clipboard API, the asynchronous clipboard API. We, of course, have articles on that. So if you're interested in the details, read on. Next slide, please. What this API has gained recently is the feature that you can copy and paste images. So you can see here I have an image that I get as a blob, and then I can put this on the clipboard, so write it on the clipboard by creating a new clipboard item. And now I have this on the clipboard. Next slide. And can then just paste it in. There's a small application that I've built that allows you to play with all this. It's pretty small, but you can maybe still see the URL. It's on my GitHub. I think I have a barcode or QR code on the next slide. Can you switch to the next slide? No, I haven't. Anyway, so what this is showing is the local font access API in action. And it also has integrated, maybe can we go one slide back, please? Yeah, one slide back. It has also integrated all the features that I talked about. So it has the copy and paste feature, so you can select the entire canvas and copy it as an image. And then you can also use one of the locally installed fonts. So you can see here, this is written with a font called Chalk Duster, the last part. And the first part is just regular Times New Roman. Next slide, please, now. And yeah, this is a copied image that I just copied from this application and pasted it into my slide deck so that you can see this is a real image that was just copied and pasted from the web application as an image into the slide deck. Next slide, please. And yeah, this is how it looks like. The application shows this. And now finally, we have the QR code. I should have go to the QR code, please. I should have put this earlier. So if you're interested in playing with this application, this is the short link that you can test. So you can play with this locally and use your locally installed fonts. You can use the copy and paste APIs so that you can see all of this in action. Next, please. So this was my short trip. You will see the application is making use of progressive enhancement. So everything sort of works. So you can still use it even if your local browser does not support all of the features. So the complete application may not be as brilliant as on a browser that has all the features, but you have progressive enhancement. So if your browser supports, for example, the local font access API, you can then select more than the predetermined fonts. But on browsers that don't support this API, you can, of course, still use the list of web-safe fonts. So this is very important. Leave no one behind. Whatever you build, think with progressive enhancement in mind. And yeah, just build applications that work for everyone. Not universally great, but that work for everyone, so that everyone can make use of them. And like that, you can be sure that your applications will be usable by the majority of users on this planet. And next, and I think this is also the final slide. Yeah, so these are my contacts. If you're interested, the deck URL is here. And also my Twitter handle again, if you have any kind of questions. And yeah, with that, thank you very much. I think we go over to the full Q&A session now. Thank you very much. The platform that we're using does not allow me to share my screen, maybe because I'm using the iPad, I don't know. But yeah, it worked like that. Thank you very much for using the slides from me.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Thomas. It was really awesome. I think the local fonts API is very powerful, and I agree with you with the Comic Sans is also my favorite font. Okay, I think we have a few questions in the YouTube chat and our social media platform. So let's begin with the first question. It's from Jeffrey Dewanga. We can do checking and add polyfill for new GS feature. Is there any way for us to polyfill new CSS feature as well?
There are a couple of features that you can polyfill. For example, in the world of Houdini, there's a CSS paint API that you can polyfill. But there's, of course, a couple of features that are super hard to polyfill. There are a couple, like, for example, something that has become very popular recently is masonry layout that is implemented in Firefox right now as an experimental feature. But on other platforms, you can fall back to a JavaScript implementation. So it's not a full polyfill in that sense, but yeah, depends on the kind of CSS feature that you're polyfilling or trying to polyfill. I'm not one of the CSS experts, so on our group, on our WebDevRel group, this would be Yuna Kravitz and, for example, Adam Argyle. If you're interested, they are very active on Twitter, so you can reach out. But yeah, I know that some of the features are polyfillable, some of them are not.
Okay. Thank you for the answer. I think we will move on to the next question. It's from Erwin Rahayu about Project Fugu. Still haven't found a way to preset the file name on save in the native file system API. Am I overlooking something?
No, you're not overlooking something. The good news is, like, literally before this event, I was reviewing a pull request where the author of the API, Marian, suggested a new feature for the file system access API, where you can have a suggested file name now. So if you go to the repository, and hopefully after this talk you will know how to find it. Just remember the WICG, and then search for the file system access API repo. There is a pull request, and I have just reviewed it, where there's a proposal for having in the show save file dialog method a new property suggested name, so that you can suggest a file name. This is a super urgent feature. I've been pushing for this to land, and I'm really looking forward to it landing soon.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer. I think we have another question from our social media platform. The next question is, okay, this is the third question. What is the best practice to design an API?
Wow, I could probably spend an entire day on this. And I'm not even an API designer. But like, I think let me take a step back. So what we see when we propose new APIs is there's a general feeling of why is this API needed? So first, you want to be sure that you do something that developers actually want. If you just do something that no one has asked for, this is of course bad. But if there's a true demand for something, be sure that your API does what developers want, which sounds kind of obvious, but sometimes it's a little not so obvious. So essentially, what you want to build is something that developers want. All the APIs that we propose have to go through the W3C, as I showed you in the very beginning of this talk. So you want to be sure that all the things that the review process in the W3C asks for are thought about in the very beginning. So a very important thing about all these APIs nowadays is privacy and security. So you want to be sure that your API is designed in a secure and in a safe and privacy respecting way. So using this example of the Google Sans font, just being aware that fonts are something that can be used to track people as a fingerprinting vector. If you design your API from the start with this in mind and present it to as many stakeholders as possible, you can be sure that your API is designed with this in mind. So essentially, if you just listen to developers, they will just say, I need this API. But then if you get, if you get a different view on it from someone who is a privacy researcher or someone who is a security expert, you will find some of the flaws in your API design, maybe, which means you can identify problems like identifiable features from an API that looks innocent. So be sure to show your API design to as many people as possible, even in the early stages. So we always ask for early design review from also people who are completely not on the stakeholders list. So people who actually maybe even want to stop an API from happening, because if you go from the mindset of how can we make this stop, you will find ways that people can use to abuse this API. So having this mindset, it allows you to identify more problems early on. And then, of course, iterate. So when there's developer feedback, try to address it. Just like with the file system access API, when we see people have this feature request for a suggested file name, be sure to incorporate it and also make your design in such a way that you can iterate without breaking anything, so that you are as future-proof as possible. This is a lot of things, but as I said, I could spend an entire day on this.
Okay, thank you so much for your answers. And before we move to the next session, I think we will have a photo session. Is that okay? We will take a picture together.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. I will count to 3. Okay. 1, 2. Okay. One more. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. 1, 2. Okay. Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us today. It's really an awesome session, and I hope you stay healthy. And see you on the next event. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you for.
Oke, tadi kita udah selesai untuk sesi yang ketiga, udah bahas tentang local fonts API, itu API yang sangat powerful, dan sekarang kita mau lanjut ke sesi keempat nih. Oh iya, sebelum aku lanjut ke sesi terakhir, aku mau ngingetin buat teman-teman, kalau misalnya setelah sesi ini nanti kita bakal ada kuis yang berhadiahkan total OVO $50 untuk 10 orang pemenang. Jadi pastiin teman-teman stay tune sampai akhir ya. Nah, untuk sesi terakhir ini kita bakal bahas tentang sign up form best practices oleh Sam Dutton, Developer Advocate at Google. Please welcome Sam.
ever tried to create an account and log into a website and found it surprisingly difficult? Now, in this video, you'll learn some simple techniques to make sure your site does a great job of handling names, passwords, and account details. But before I start, do you really need your users to create an account? You know, the best login is no login. Don't gate features behind login just because you can. Asking a user to create an account is asking them a favor. And remember that every password and every item of personal data that you store carries with it something I call privacy data debt. If you just need to save information for a user between navigations or browsing sessions, use client-side storage instead of forcing the user to create an account. You can find out more about client-side storage on web.dev. For example, for shopping sites, forcing users to create an account to make a purchase has been cited as one of the major reasons for shopping cart abandonment. Now, if you do run an online store, make guests check out the default and offer to save customer details and create an account once a purchase has been completed. Okay, with all that out of the way, if you must get users to sign in, make it as quick and easy as possible. Firstly, make it really clear where to sign in. You know, one big login or sign in button is good, not just some obscure icon or vague wording. And once users have signed in, make it really obvious how they can access their account details. In particular, make it simple to change passwords. Now, you may be wondering whether to add buttons or links for account creation as well as to sign in. Well, many sites now simply display a single sign in button, and when the user clicks on that, they also get a link to create an account if necessary. Now, that's a common pattern now, and most of your users will understand it. Make sure to link accounts for users who sign up via an identity provider such as Google or Facebook, and who also sign up using email and password. That's easy to do if you can access a user's email address from the profile data from the identity provider and match the two accounts. Now, I keep saying this, but whatever you do, make the most of the powerful cross-platform functionality that's built into form and input elements on all modern browsers. You can find out more from our article and video about sign-in form best practices on web.dev. That also has lots of great tips on how to improve form design, layout, and accessibility. You know, in the sign-up flow, your job is to minimize complexity. So cut the clutter and keep the user focused. This is not the time for distractions or temptations. Collect additional user data, such as name and address, only when you need to, and when the user sees a clear benefit from providing that data. Every item of data you communicate and store incurs cost and liability, and you need to remember that. And by the way, don't double up your inputs just to make sure users get their contact details right. With autocomplete, that just makes no sense. Instead, send a confirmation code to the user once they've entered their contact details, and then continue with account creation once they respond. That, again, is a well-known sign-up pattern now and a good approach. And one simple technique you might want to consider is to allow password-free sign-in by sending users a code every time they sign in on a new device or browser. Sites such as Slack and Medium use a version of this. As with federated login, this has the added benefit that you don't need to manage passwords. Now, in this case, you'll need to make a careful decision about session length, you know, how long the user remains logged in and what might cause you to log them out. But you'll need to do that whatever approach you take to user identity. There's no one hard and fast rule here, but you need to consider mobile versus desktop and whether users are sharing on desktop or, you know, sharing devices. You can get around some of the issues of shared devices by enforcing re-authentication for sensitive features, for example, when a purchase is made or an account updated. So here's the elephant in the room. You know, what's up with passwords? Passwords are so, you know, last century. We need to wean ourselves off passwords, but that's not going to be an easy journey. You should, of course, offer federated login via identity providers,
But the reality is that some users are more comfortable with email and password login. The problem, of course, is that users may give up on your site if they forget their password, and especially with a new phone or computer and on shared devices. So what can you do? Well, you need to help third-party and built-in browser password managers do what they do best: suggest and store passwords so that users don't need to choose, remember, or type passwords themselves. Password managers work really well in modern browsers, syncing accounts across devices, across native and web apps, and for new devices. And this means the single most important task for you is to make sure you code your forms correctly. If you do one thing after watching this video, please double check your HTML to make sure you're using the correct autocomplete values in your sign-up form. For sign-up forms, use autocomplete equals new password for new passwords and autocomplete equals email for email addresses. Coding forms correctly enables browser password managers to understand your code in order to save and to suggest strong passwords. Now, enabling password managers to suggest strong passwords is the best option, but many users want to enter their own passwords. So you need to implement rules for password strength. I won't go into the details here, but the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, provides full guidance. Now, whatever rules you choose for passwords, you should never allow compromised passwords. Once a user has entered a password, you need to check that it's not a password that's already been compromised. The site Have I Been Pwned provides an API for password checking, or you can run this as a service yourself. Chrome Password Manager also allows you to check if any of your existing passwords have been compromised. If you do reject the password that a user proposes, tell them specifically why it was rejected. Show password problems in line as soon as the user has entered a value, not after they attempt to submit the sign-up form. You should, however, allow password pasting. There are a number of sensible use cases for copying a password from one context to another. Now, just a couple of quick things about password policy on the back end. And the single most important rule here is salt and hash your passwords, please. In other words, do not store or transmit passwords in plain text. And don't try to reinvent, like your own hashing algorithm. Also, don't force users to periodically change their password. Research has shown that forcing password updates can be costly for IT departments, of course, and doesn't really have much impact on security. It's also likely to encourage people to use insecure, memorable passwords or to keep a physical record of passwords. Instead, you should monitor for unusual account activity and warn users. You should be doing that anyway. If possible, you should also monitor passwords for your existing users to check for passwords that have become compromised because of data breaches. You can also give your users access to their account login history, showing them where and when a login happened. You should, of course, make it really simple for users to reset their password if they forget it. OWASP, or OWASP, that's the Open Web Application Security Project, provides detailed guidance for this and lots of other identity use cases. You certainly should not use password hints to re-verify accounts. These are highly insecure. You should consider supporting multi-factor authentication, especially if your site handles personal or sensitive information. I really recommend taking a look at Eiji Kitamura's work on this, including his new video about SMS OTP best practices. So, in the real world, you'll need to implement password handling. However, you should also enable your users to log in via a third-party identity provider, also known as federated login. Now, this approach has several advantages. For users who create an account using federated login, you don't need to ask for, communicate, or store passwords. You may also be able to access additional verified profile information from federated login, such as an email address, which means the user doesn't have to enter that data and you don't need to do the verification yourself. Federated login can also make it much easier for users when they get a new device. And you really need to think about this to consider first day experience. Remember that many users are now expecting login from their phone, their laptop, their desktop, tablet, like TV, in the car, and, on other platforms as well. And this is a moment where you risk losing users, or at least losing contact with them until they get set up again. You need to make it as easy as possible for users on new devices to get back up and running on your site. So this is another area where federated login can really help. Whether users access federated login or not, you should make account switching simple. Many users share devices, and it really reduces friction to be able to easily swap between accounts. Now, here's a thing that's crucial for keeping your users and your business safe. On many sites, it's surprisingly difficult to work out how to change your password. It's especially important to help your users change their password if they discover that it's been compromised. To make this even easier, you should add a well-known change password URL redirect to your site. Now, this enables password managers to navigate your users directly to your password management page. This feature is now implemented in Safari and Chrome and is coming to other browsers. And you can find out more from our web.dev article. You should also make it simple for users to delete their account if that's what they want. So let's talk about names and usernames. And the first rule here is don't insist on a username unless you need one. Well, if you do need usernames, don't impose unreasonable rules on them. And allow users to update their usernames and other personal information. It sounds obvious, but that's why on the back end, you need a unique ID for every user, like not an identifier based on user data, such as a username. Now, you might want to validate names and usernames on the front end, but you need to be as unrestrictive as possible with characters and alphabets. So here's a top tip. For names, addresses, and usernames, don't use regular expressions that only match Latin characters. Use Unicode letter matching instead. And your backend storage should support that securely as input and as output. Okay, one last thing. For sign-up forms, it's crucial to implement analytics and real user measurement. For your sign-up forms, you need to monitor page analytics for page views, bounce rates, exits, and so on. And make sure to add interaction analytics, such as goal funnels. Where do your users abandon sign-up and so on? And events, like, for example, what proportion of users click your forgot password link. And lastly, track performance metrics to understand the real experience of your users. You can check out Web Vitals on web.dev to see how you can access real user performance data for core metrics. So that covers some of the basics. To find out a whole lot more, take a look at the article and the code lab that go with this video. And thanks so much for watching.
Okay. Hi Sam, how are you?
Hey, good to see you. I wish I could be there in person. It's been like more than 4 years since I was in Jakarta, so one day I'll be back.
Hope you can visit us soon.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for your session. It's awesome. I think the best practice is really important for both security and user experience. And I think we already have a few questions in both in our social media platform, and I think a few questions in the YouTube chat. So let's begin the Q&A, okay? Okay, this is the first question. This is from our social media platform. What is federated login? Any other alternatives or innovation in your mind that might better for user experience side?
Sure. Yeah. So federated login. I mean, or some people have referred to federated identity. It's a little ambiguous, different meanings for different people, but it's generally used to mean like when you enable users to log into your site via a third-party identity provider. So something like Google. Now, single sign-on is also used sometimes to mean like one-time sign-in across multiple services that belong to the same organizations. So something like, Gmail, Calendar, and Google Drive. Looking beyond federated login, just a couple of things I noted down here. So think about WebAuthn. This is a new standard to allow users like sign in, using a public key credential generated by hardware. And there are actually other biometric, forms of data that can be used as well. Something a little further out, self-sovereign identity and decentralized identity, kind of new concepts on the horizon that my colleague Eiji Kitamura mentioned, and these allow individuals to manage their own identity and to allow authorities to provide and prove certificates as they wish. And lastly, GNAP, G-N-A-P. NAP, I don't know how you pronounce this. It's the next generation of OAuth 2. And I mean, this is still at a very early stage. You can find out more on the IETF site. And not to forget WebID, and that's like a browser native privacy preserving solution for identity federation. And this again, though, is very early stages. Comment welcome on the GitHub repo for WebID.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer. Do we have another question? Okay, this is the next question. Is there any way to sign up while offline, like storing in a local storage and send it to the web once connected? Is it a good practice?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I'm not sure that implementing some kind of offline sign up makes sense. If you think about it, if the user sees a sign up like UI, they're probably online. Now, having said that, it's possible now to enable interactions with a site while the user is offline. And to do that, you should have a look at something called background sync. This is a service worker feature that enables you to defer running code until the user has connectivity. So the sync event fires when the browser thinks connectivity has become available. And so in a service worker, you can listen for that sync event and then run some code in the handler. So for example, to synchronize a user's shopping basket or whatever. Now, yeah, like I say, if connectivity is available and you call that, the code will be run immediately. Otherwise, the code will be run when connectivity becomes available again. If you do want to use background sync, I strongly recommend using the Workbox library. I mean, as with all things service worker, that's probably the best way to go unless you want to get into some really low-level customization.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer. Do we have another question? Okay, is there any tips to know whether our data account is being used properly on the website or not?
I mean, I'm assuming this is asking about the ways you can ensure that your data isn't, misused. So in short, I think the only advice I can give there is to limit the data that you actually share. And obviously, take care, think about why are people asking for this data and take it up with the website if you think they're asking for more data than they need. Now, as a developer or a site publisher, the key point is to reduce the amount of data that you ask for. Like I've said in the video and the articles that go with that, every item of data incurs liability and cost. I've referred to this as, like a bit like you have technical debt, but with data, you have a kind of data debt. You have this liability and ongoing cost. Also, if you're running a website, make sure you don't allow compromised passwords. And if people check accounts for compromised passwords, and also check for unusual activity and make sure to tell users if a login attempt is made for their account. And that's why, those are great ways you can help keep user data private.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for the answer. Do we have another question? I think we have some time left. Okay, what is the most secure way to store a login session with the least minimum risk?
Yeah, this is, I mean, wow, this is a big question. You could have an entire conference about this, I think. So I'm not sure if like store a login session, refers to storage, like data storage, backend best practice. I mean, I think the best I can suggest here is to take a look. There's a really great Google Cloud article, which is called 12 Best Practices for User Account Authentication and Password Management. I would suggest looking at that. That has a lot of detail and links to really good resources about how to do that. The other resource I would definitely recommend, and goes into lots of detail about this, is anything from OWASP, a great site, and they have a series of cheat sheets to help you make sure that that you do log in securely and privately.
Okay, thank you so much. So it says it's not only the best practices for the developers, but also for the users too, right?
That's true.
Okay.
That's absolutely true.
Thank you so much for the questions. I think that's the last questions because we don't have time left. I'm really sorry. Okay, before we move on to this is the last question, I guess. This is the last
Okay,
question.
yeah, sure.
Is there any possible way to log in user without involving user to do so? Auto login based on login account in Chrome browser.
Yeah. So, I mean, the person asking this question, it's a good question. I'm sure is aware of Google's OneTap library, but if you haven't used that, then check it out. That, of course, is supported by Chrome and Firefox, though because of ITP, it's not supported by Safari. You can kind of think of this as Google Account Federation. You should also take a look at the Credential Management API, though bear in mind that, again, this is currently only supported by Chrome. This is a standardized JavaScript API that gives developers access to a browser's credential manager, so, via a JavaScript API. And that can help you sign in users more easily. Check out the articles from Eiji Kitamura about that. Really, really great stuff coming through there.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that is the last question. And before we move on to the next session, we will have a photo session first. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. That's great.
Okay, I will count.
I could be there in real life, but anyway.
Yes. Okay, I will count to 3 and please strike pose. 1, 2. Okay, one more. Okay, I will use this sign as
okay.
Okay, 1, 2. Okay, I think that's good. Okay, thank you so much for today, for joining us and for the session. It was awesome, and I hope you stay healthy and see you next time.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope you all stay healthy too.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Oke, kita udah tadi sesi terakhir kita udah bahas tentang best practice sign up form dan login juga, dan kita sebelum terakhir seperti yang udah dijanjiin di awal, kita bakal ada kuis buat teman-teman semua yang di rumah, dan kuis ini nanti bakal berhadiah dengan total hadiah $50 OVO untuk 10 orang pemenang. Nah, jadi pasti nih teman-teman siap-siap ikutan kuis ya. Nah, buat teman-teman yang mau ikutan kuis, bisa klik link, linknya bakal ada di sebelah kanan aku. Nah, ini dia linknya. Teman-teman bisa langsung aja klik linknya supaya dapat hadiah. Ayo cepet-cepet, supaya dapat hadiahnya, dan selamat mengerjakan. Oke. Ayo, kita punya waktu 3 menit untuk kerjain kuisnya ya. Nanti setelah ini kita bakal umumin pemenangnya setelah 3 menit ini. Teman-teman juga aku juga kepo dong kalau teman-teman yang nonton gimana sih sesi kita hari ini. Dan aku ingetin juga buat teman-teman, jangan lupa kalau Chrome Dev Summit Extended 2020 ini berlangsung selama 3 hari, jadi nanti bakal ada day 2 dan day 3. Jangan lupa teman-teman bisa ke website kita untuk tahu lebih detailnya, dan jangan lupa ikutan ya.
Hello everyone, my name is Tamas and
Oke, gimana teman-teman? Udah selesai belum ngerjain kuisnya? Oke, semoga teman-teman pada bisa dan pada menang ya. Lumayan loh hadiahnya. Oke, kita bakal ngumumin pemenangnya nih. Nah, udah ada belum ya pemenangnya? Oke, kayaknya kuisnya udah ada pemenangnya nih. Nah, kita mau umumin pemenangnya dulu ya. Hadiahnya itu total $50 untuk 10 orang pemenang. Nah, pada penasaran kan? Oke, kita mau umumin ya. Kira-kira siapa ya? Oke. Udah ada belum? Oke, pemenangnya udah ada nih guys. Oke, tapi sebelum aku umumin, aku pengen tahu dulu dong teman-teman, untuk sesi kita hari ini menurut kalian gimana? Tolong komen di YouTube chat ya, aku penasaran banget nih. Kan kita tadi ada 4 sesi tuh, kita udah bahas banyak banget tentang sign up form best practices, terus tentang tools to update your performance web, dan lain-lain. Nah, menurut teman-teman yang nonton di rumah, sesi hari ini gimana? Teman-teman bisa komen di YouTube chat ya, sebelum aku umumin pengumumannya, biar makin penasaran. Ada yang bilang, thank you GDG Jakarta, offline event kapan nih? Duh, doain aja ya, semoga coronanya cepat selesai supaya kita bisa ngadain offline event. Oke. Keren semua materinya, oke. Thank you ya yang udah nonton. Nah, kita mau umumin pengumumannya. Ada 10 orang pemenang. Oke. Today quiz winner. Yang pertama ada Hunandika Adiota Purba, selamat. Terus ada Nyoman Diatrin Arumsari, ada Wahyu Nurfadilah, ada Komang Ariana, Manyang Megantoro, Hamdan Prakoso, Erwin Rahayu, Tado Muhammad, Andre Setiawan, dan Arik Sasmita. Wah, selamat ya teman-teman yang dapat hadiah OVO. Menarik banget kan, seru banget kan kuisnya. Oke, ini ada komen-komen dari YouTube chatnya juga bagus, hal-hal baru menarik. Semoga bermanfaat ya. Oke, nah kita udah selesai untuk sesi hari ini. Semoga bermanfaat. Aku sebagai MC mau mohon undur diri dan mohon maaf jika ada kesalahan. Jangan lupa teman-teman untuk datang ke Day 2 dan Day 3 ya. Dan nah setelah ini bakal ada link feedback. Teman-teman jangan lupa isi link feedback buat kita ya, karena itu berguna banget buat kita. Nah, thank you so much. See you next time. Bye.